Well, Erika, we just wrapped up recording episode 1 of Habakkuk with your husband, and he made a comment about the 12, and I could tell by the look and there was so much more in there to pull out. And I'm like, hey, let's do a bonus podcast. So this will be coming out the same time we release Habakkuk 1, because what we want to do is add a little bit more color
and context.
And context. Context and color, I know. But what's fascinating is because, Bryan, you brought up the idea that in our, I'm going to say Christian Bibles, the Old Testament is not in the same order as the Jewish Bible. It's all the same books, but they're just set up differently because, like you were just saying, is actually in the Jewish order, Proverbs 31 is followed by the book of Ruth, which is just fascinating. If you go, okay, here we're looking at that wife of noble character, and then we go into the story of Ruth and go, okay, here's someone who walked it out, who lived it out. Here's an example. Or those of you who read the Bible chronologically, when you go 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then you go 1st and 2nd Chronicles, it's all over again, the exact same thing in the Christian Bible, but in the Jewish Bible, it goes 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then what'd you say, Eric? Isaiah, because what's the idea there?
Isaiah then gives you, it's almost like Isaiah, you've learned and read about all these kings in the book of Kings, and then Isaiah goes, okay, here's God's perspective on those kings and what was happening in Israel and Judah during that time. And so then you start going through, they're called the latter prophets.
Okay.
Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then the book of the 12, kind of giving you commentary on what you just have read.
And so that's where we're coming over to Bryan.
Yeah.
To give us commentary.
Well, and I've used the analogy, if you are like a movie nerd and you love to watch the director's
commentary
on
Lord of the Rings is amazing.
Yeah.
Nerd. Yes.
But it's true.
That's how I liken the prophets, especially the 12, the book of the 12. You've seen the historical events as you read through the book of Kings, but what's the perspective from heaven on that?
Oh.
So you're seeing, now you get to be transported and hearing from like God's perspective as he speaks through these prophets. And you zero in on particular highlights of the overall historical timeline. Maybe not as important from what a history book would record, like great battles and such, but from God's perspective, the 12 are like that director's commentary. You get a behind-the-scenes look at the important things from God's perspective during that several hundred-year period.
Okay, so essentially the 12 would be those minor prophets.
Yeah, if you've heard of the minor prophets, that would be the 12 if you're talking about the Hebrew canonical ordering or grouping. And even historically, you find that the 12 were short and they were written on a single scroll.
Okay.
The same length of a scroll like Isaiah or Ezekiel. And if you add up all the words, the 12 are actually comparable to the size of an Isaiah or Jeremiah.
The quote major prophets?
Right.
Okay.
So all together they would hold their own against.
So
those.
then, because what we want people to see and understand, what I've learned from you, is when you read them as one, there's themes that carry out. I think we talked about that in Jonah. I think that's when I brought that up.
I think Jonah to Nahum, I think.
Yes, and Amos. But so you almost, if you're studying it, if you want to start connecting the dots.
Yes.
Because words or images or phrases get started in one book.
And they get picked up and carried on through another book. So you get these seams or hinges that tie together the different books. For example, if you read the last chapter of Joel, there's a unique phrase that says the Lord roars from Zion and he's coming out in judgment against God's enemies. Well, the very next chapter, in the first chapter of Amos, that's how the Lord introduces his oracles through Amos. The Lord roars from Zion.
Okay.
And that exact phrase picks up in the next chapter. And in this case, where you've been maybe prepared in Joel that the Lord roars and he's coming from Zion to rescue his people and defeat the wicked adversaries. Well, here in Amos chapter 1, the Lord's roaring from Zion against the injustice of the people.
Okay.
So it's that's just an example, and there's dozens of others. There's just layers. Like you said, these themes build. They start in Hosea, and then they build and add more and more depth until you get to the end of Malachi.
So essentially, if you start with Malachi, you should see some of the culmination of some of these, and it should send you wanting to go back to the beginning to go, okay, I need a complete picture.
Right.
So start at the beginning with that dot or that trail. And then you made a comment, too, when we were just recording the podcast on Habakkuk 1 through 4, that it goes north and south.
Yep. Some have noted. So there's again, overlay this with your history in the Book of Kings.
Okay.
Kings 1 and 2. Consider that one book. So there's an alternation or alternating. Why does that sound funny?
Alternating. Yeah.
Okay. There's a pattern there.
Good save.
And it goes north, south, north, south. So let's go through it. So Hosea.
Would you like the
speaks
Bible?
To the north. I know I'm trying to do too many things in my brain at once. Hosea is to the north, and Joel speaks to the south. Amos comes from the south, but speaks to the north. Obadiah speaking to the south. Now note, pause on this, Obadiah is out of chronological order because he's speaking to Judah, the south,
But it's
after the Babylonian Empire has destroyed Judah.
Okay.
And it's speaking to Edom. Yes, you're correct. But it is still the north-south
Okay.
alternating pattern. So then Jonah comes, number 5, and he's speaking on behalf of the north. He comes from the north. He speaks to Nineveh, the capital city of the north's arch enemy, Assyria.
We have a whole podcast series on Jonah.
Check it out.
Yep.
Good one. Then followed up by Micah,
Okay.
which is speaking to the south. And then you come to Nahum, which is his whole oracle is against Nineveh, which is an interesting contrast to Jonah. But that's a whole nother rabbit
We're
trail.
waiting for you to finish that commentary. I will keep pointing that out.
But it's speaking against the North's arch enemy. And at this point, I as you overlay this with the Book of Kings and the events on the ground, I think the North has already been destroyed, but we're seeing the revenge, but the final comeuppance,
Okay.
the justice being served for what the North had suffered here with Nahum. Then we flip to Habakkuk, and we're focused on the South, Zephaniah, South, and then the final 3 are post-exilic, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, focused on the South. And why does it not keep alternating?
Because the North is gone.
The North is gone by that point.
Oh, fascinating.
So you again, the contours of those two fit and
Right.
over top of each other.
Okay.
And I think we were talking about this before hitting the record button, but like the day of the Lord is a key theme that builds, and it starts in Joel, and it's hinted at even a little bit in Hosea, but that day of the Lord shows up over and over and over. Amos and Jonah and Nahum, Malachi. And the 12, I liken them as an anthology of prophets. They all have their own style, their tone. Some are historical, some are more poetic. But what you're going to see as you lay them all out together is these themes get carried across. And I don't know if you remember, there's like this old Coke commercial from the 80s, maybe 80s or 90s. And there's this commercial, and it shows these people are having fun, and there's like the camera zooms in on this bottle of Coke, and they're drinking or whatever, and they set the bottle down, the camera's focused on the bottle, then another person picks it up, and they're like a totally different city.
Oh, yeah.
And then the camera continues to focus on this bottle as it goes from scene to scene to different people, but you've got the same bottle of Coke that's getting passed. I think that helps you get a bit of an understanding of how the 12 can function.
Okay.
Because they're taking a theme, several themes actually, one of which is like the day of the Lord, and they'll carry it, they'll pass it from one to the other like a baton. And you see the handoffs, like the Lord roaring from Zion. That's your handoff, but watch for where that theme goes. Because it's very Hebraic, because you're going to read about the day of the Lord brings mercy for Nineveh in Jonah. But then the day of the Lord brings judgment on Nineveh in Nahum. The day of the Lord in Amos was this thing that the people were kind of hoping for. And Amos is like, you don't want that. Because the day of the Lord is judgment for those who are against him. It doesn't matter if you claim to be the right people or claim, like, are you truly God's people living according to his ways? And that's how you get on the one hand and then on the other as you pass through the 12. So that, again, that's a deep dive on just one theme.
Right. But it helps to go, okay, just to me, I always go, what do I do with the minor prophets? They don't all make sense. But if I start to look for repetition and patterns I see, at least I can start to pull more out and then see different pictures and connect those dots. Do you have anything you want to add, Er?
Nope.
Okay. But I will say, Erika is currently studying for our fall series. And she did say this is going to come into play in the fall. So didn't know that when we started talking. She told me that before I brought up this idea with Bryan. But we just thought that might help flesh out kind of what he wanted to say in Habakkuk chapter 1, give you a better understanding. But we also said, you know what? It's a big enough deal. People need to understand this and not just give a quick 30-second wrap up. So, thanks for joining us, and as always, this is the context and color of the Bible. Now you can go finish Habakkuk with us.